a very tight rubber band. In order to check for accuracy, all the outside points have to line up directly next to one another perfectly. It has to be a perfect assembly in order to check it. It looks like I got lucky. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 tries to get that stop block right. Whatever it takes though, you have to take the time. It has to be dead on. Now that the sanding jig is all calibrated, I can go back, sand those small segments of kingwood from about 20 minutes ago. In this situation, my segments are only about 3/8 of an inch tall, and my stop block is double that. It makes it very awkward to manipulate the segments. So I'm going to replace that stop block with one about the same height as my segments. By reversing the position of the clamping plate and by putting a shim under one side, I can easily secure this new stop block. By taking the time to create a shorter, less thick stop block, I'll have much better access with my fingers to control the segments during the sanding process. It's worth doing, and this stop block can be used over and over for similar situations. So here are my 2 rings all ready for glue. And guess what? That's the next lesson. Before bringing out the glue bottle, I thought I'd show you this visitor to the backyard. Probably about 2 years old. Didn't seem to be interested a bit in segmented turning. Gluing segmented rings together is a 2-step process. First step, apply glue to all the appropriate surfaces. Second step, squeeze most of the glue from the joints in order to create nice tight glue lines. The first step in gluing a segmented ring together is to get all the fuzz off, get all the dust off, get them clean. Put a rubber band or a hose clamp around, do a dry fit, line up everything perfectly, and then check it with a bright light source. Make sure it's dead on before you glue it. When you do a dry fit, all the points have to line up perfectly. During the glue job, you might miss a set of points. That can cause a problem. And that's why I strongly recommend using what's called the half-ring technique. By placing a couple of small spacers opposite one another, you create a gap which will absorb any misalignment error that might occur as a result of a segment being slightly out of position. These 2 gaps help ensure that all the other joints will be tight. I'm applying glue to all the surfaces, a lot of glue, because I want the surfaces to stay slippery until I've applied adequate pressure. And the small size rubber bands work quite well. Small rubber bands followed by larger, stiffer bands. I want to make sure everything stays flat. A few taps of the hammer seems to work. During the drying, a horizontal pipe works well. For spacers, I like to use little pieces of split dowel. By using the bandsaw, I can quickly generate quite a few of these in just a few minutes. The flat side is easy to glue on, and the round side provides an articulation point for the opposing segment. Well, what do you do if your hands or my hands aren't big enough to go around a ring this size? I'll show you another way. This is what I call a rubber band gluing jig. It's just 3/4 inch MDF, concentric circles divided into 8 quadrants, a series of holes drilled, tiny holes which will accept finish nails. The finish nails will hold rubber bands. By placing my ring on the jig, I can determine which row of holes to use. A piece of wax paper, a row of finish nails, a rubber band, positioning out the segments around the perimeter, a puddle of glue, the 2 spacers, spreading the glue on all the segments, releasing finish nails one at a time, using one finish nail as an anchor, putting more rubber bands on, keeping things flat. And onto the pipe it goes. In case you were wondering, Type Bond Original. Assembling the half rings is pretty simple. A little sanding to get rid of the glue squeeze out so they slide on the table smoothly, touching up the ends ever so slightly, checking the fit with a bright light, a little glue, 3 or 4 rubber bands, and these are ready to be used in a turning. So for small rings like these Kingwood rings, rubber bands work pretty well. Up to about 8 inches in size, I usually use rubber bands. Larger than that, I go to a hose clamp. These stainless steel hose clamps, you can buy these in any hardware store. You can link them together into any size you need. They're stainless steel, so you can keep them relatively clean of dried, cured glue. Let me show you a quick glue job using hose clamps. It's pretty much the same procedure as with the rubber bands. A puddle of glue, put the spacers on, spread the glue. I like using a segment as my glue spreader. It's convenient. Get them in a circle, wrap it with a hose clamp, tighten it. I use a drill motor with a bit for the bulk of the spinning, then I finish it off with a screwdriver. It doesn't have to be super tight. Make sure all the outside points line up. Preparing large half rings for that final glue step on a small disc sander can be difficult. I've found that a homemade device actually does a better job. What I have here is a very straight, perfectly straight piece of oak, and I'm gluing it to this piece of MDF. A little spray adhesive allows me to attach some 80 grit sandpaper to the oak. It usually only takes a few passes back and forth against the 80 grit to get a perfect joint. Notice that I flip one piece back over. This cancels out any vertical error that may occur. Sometimes you have a ring that's too big, too many segments, you can't spread the glue fast enough to use hose clamps or rubber bands. In those cases you need to put pairs together. Maybe you've got a zigzag ring where you want to focus on the individual joints. In those cases, you glue pairs together, you reduce the number of joints. I'll show you a variety of techniques for just putting pairs together. The simplest way to put two pieces of wood together is just to apply glue, rub it back and forth, drive the glue out of the joint, keep a little pressure for a few seconds and let it be. While it's not necessary to apply a clamp, most of the time I do. It just gives me a level of confidence that all the glue's been driven from the joint. Here's a different type of clamp doing the same thing. Rubber bands can be an effective way to clamp pairs together. And if you've got a joint where the center line from point to point goes right through the middle, a quick clamp is very handy. Remember those two kingwood rings that were put together differently? Well, I've stacked them. Now I'll turn them and show you the difference in appearance. As you remember, one ring was put together with the grain all aligned the same. The other ring was put together randomly. There is a difference. It's very subtle. It may not be worth it in most cases. In some cases, it might be worth it. As I filmed this last lesson, the apple blossoms all fell off, but now the golden chain is in bloom. Your success as a segmented wood turner relies heavily. The most important skill you need to learn is how to put round segmented rings together. Round and with perfect joinery. I'm going to show you a time lapse of this particular ring as a means of review. Before cutting your segments, make sure you've done some test cuts with scrap wood. That angle should be dead on. Also, make sure you've started out with consistently dimensioned material. If the angles that you cut are dead on accurate, then it takes just minimal sanding to perfect those surfaces to create the best joinery possible. Take a few moments, inspect the surfaces, get any fuzz cleaned off, and then dust everything. Make sure the segments are as clean as you can get them. Before gluing together, do a dry fit. Inspect it. You want to find any imperfection before you start gluing. And once again, I want to say I highly recommend the half ring technique using spacers. That half ring technique does add another step, but it goes a long ways towards ensuring perfect joinery. Let me add a comment about clamping pressure. Don't ever be fooled into thinking that a little more pressure will help close up a bad joint. With the skill to build perfect rings, you can now design and build most any segmented turning.